It was one of those perfect spring mornings. Birds chirping, gentle breeze, and the kind of sunlight that makes you believe the universe isn't entirely a chaotic void of indifference. I was enjoying my coffee on the front porch, admiring my newly established experimental garden, when the mailman delivered what would become the catalyst for my descent into beautiful madness. A letter from the Peaceful Pines Homeowners Association. I should have known something was wrong when I saw the embossed gold seal on the envelope. A pine tree encircled by what looked suspiciously like barbed wire. Inside was an official citation, printed on paper so crisp it could give you a paper cut just by looking at it. Notice of violation. Unauthorized botanical specimens, fine amount $350, violation details, non-conforming plant varieties not listed in the approved Peaceful Pines Landscaping Guidelines, Section 7, 3.2. I almost spat out my coffee. $350? For plants? I looked at my garden in confusion. Sure, it wasn't the cookie-cutter arrangement of boxwoods and begonias that dominated the neighborhood, but my plants were hardly offensive. Just some experimental hybrids I'd been developing for my research on drought-resistant native species. Part of my work as a botanist at the university was creating plants that could thrive with minimal water, something that seemed rather valuable in our increasingly parched climate. "What exactly is unauthorized about you?" I asked the cheerful cluster of purple-tinged succulents nearest the walkway. They didn't answer, which was fortunate because talking to plants in Peaceful Pines probably violated some bylaw about public displays of eccentricity. I'd moved to this suburban development 6 months ago after my divorce. After 15 years of marriage to a woman who believed houseplants were simply furniture that required watering, I was finally free to pursue my botanical interests without judgment, or so I'd thought. My name is Dr. Elliot Clark, 38, tenured professor of botanical sciences, with a specialization in rare species cultivation and genetic modification. I have 3 published books, an H-index that makes my colleagues quietly resentful, and apparently a criminal garden. The house had seemed perfect. Good light exposure, adequate yard space for experimental beds, and a basement I could convert to a small lab. The realtor had mentioned something about community guidelines, sliding a thick binder across the closing table, but I'd been too excited about the south-facing exposure to pay attention, a decision I was now regretting intensely. I pulled out my phone and found the HOA website, which featured an aggressively cheerful banner proclaiming "Peaceful Pines, where uniformity meets community." That should have been my first warning. My second warning came later that week at the monthly HOA meeting, which was held in the Beige on Beige Community Center. I arrived armed with botanical taxonomy references, sustainability metrics, and the naive belief that reasonable people could be persuaded by science. The HOA board sat at a long table at the front of the room, like some suburban tribunal. At the center, a woman in her early 60s, with an immaculately sculpted silver bob and a blazer with shoulders sharp enough to qualify as weapons, surveyed the room with the intensity of a hawk eyeing field mice. "That's Meredith Winters," whispered the man beside me, "HOA president for the last 8 years. Rumor has it she once fined someone for having wind chimes that were tonally inconsistent with community standards." Before I could respond, Meredith's gavel cracked against the table. "Item 4 on tonight's agenda, landscaping violations. Dr. Elliot Clark, you wish to contest your citation?" I stood, clutching my folder of evidence. "Yes, thank you. I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding my garden. The species I've planted are actually experimental hybrids developed for drought resistance and—" "Dr. Clark," Meredith interrupted, adjusting her reading glasses while consulting a binder that I recognized as the HOA Bible I'd ignored. "Are these plants on the approved list of botanical specimens?" "Well, no, but that's because they're new cultivars that—" "Section 7, 3.2 clearly states all exterior botanical selections must be from the approved list, she said, her voice as crisp as her collar. Your credentials, while impressive in academic circles, hold no authority here in Peaceful Pines. But these plants use 60% less water than conventional landscaping, I protested. They're beneficial to the local ecosystem and— We are not concerned with ecosystems, Dr. Clark. We are concerned with community aesthetic cohesion. She gestured to the row of nodding board members beside her. Uniformity is what maintains our property values. Exceptions lead to chaos. For the next 15 minutes, I was treated to a master class in bureaucratic stonewalling. Every scientific argument I presented was met with references to subsections, paragraphs, and appendices of the HOA regulations. The other board members, 5 identically coiffed neighbors whose names blurred together, nodded in unison at every point Meredith made, like those bobblehead dashboard ornaments. All those in favor of upholding the violation? Meredith finally asked. 6 hands shot up immediately. All opposed? My single raised hand looked pathetically outnumbered. The violation stands. Next item, improper trash can concealment at 347 Pinecone Drive. As I gathered my useless documentation, a man about my age with salt and pepper hair leaned over. They cited me for having bird feeders last month, he whispered. They're relentless. I'm Darius, by the way. 2 doors down from you. Is she always like this? I asked, nodding toward Meredith, who was now detailing the acceptable dimensions for garbage can screens with disturbing enthusiasm. This is her being pleasant, Darius replied. Last year she tried to ban wind-pollinated plants because they, and I quote, engage in reproductive activities without neighborhood consent. I left the meeting with my fine still in place, and a growing sense that I had inadvertently moved into the botanical equivalent of Alcatraz. Initially, I tried to comply. I really did. I spent a weekend researching the HOA's approved plant list, which turned out to be a soul-crushing document detailing 30 varieties of non-invasive, low-maintenance, visually uniform specimens suitable for the Peaceful Pines aesthetic. The restrictions were mind-boggling. Rose bushes must maintain symmetrical growth patterns and not exceed 24 inches in height. Foliage colors limited to 3 approved shades of green. See color chart appendix. All flowering species must coordinate with the seasonal color scheme. There was even a section titled Acceptable Mulch Materials, which specifically excluded exotic wood chips, decorative stones exceeding 1 inch in diameter, and any recycled materials that may suggest environmental activism. That Sunday, I grudgingly began reorganizing my front garden, carefully removing my precious experimental hybrids and replacing them with HOA-approved landscaping robots, identical hostas, and precisely spaced impatiens that looked like they were standing at attention. While I was measuring the regulation distance between 2 meatball-shaped shrubs, exactly 36 inches, center to center, a black luxury SUV pulled up across the street. Meredith emerged with 2 couples who were clearly prospective residents, her voice carrying across the quiet street. Peaceful Pines has won Most Uniform Neighborhood Appearance 3 years running, she announced proudly. Our property values have increased 12% above the county average due to our stringent aesthetic controls. She gestured toward my yard. That property is currently undergoing compliance correction. We take violations quite seriously here. The couples nodded appreciatively, and I fought the urge to throw my measuring tape at Meredith's immaculately coiffed head. Later that evening, as dusk settled, I was in my garage-turned lab, sulking among my refugee plants. I'd brought all my experimental specimens inside, unwilling to sacrifice years of research to Meredith's botanical genocide. In the corner of my lab stood my pride and joy, a rare hybrid I'd been developing that combined genes from several drought-resistant species to create a plant that could thrive in almost desert-like conditions while still producing vibrant purple flowers. "Don't worry, Mendel," I said to the plant, which I'd named after geneticist Gregor Mendel. "We'll find you a new home at the university greenhouse." I moved around the lab, transferring some bioluminescent proteins I'd been experimenting with. It was a side project, investigating whether certain protein structures from bioluminescent marine organisms could be synthesized and potentially integrated into plant cells to create natural lighting. Purely theoretical research, mostly to satisfy my own curiosity. As I reached for a test tube, my elbow knocked over a small vial of the compound. The blue-tinged liquid spilled across the table and splashed onto Mendel's pot. "Damn it!" I grabbed paper towels and quickly cleaned up the spill, making sure to record the accident in my lab notes. The compound wasn't dangerous, just protein structures suspended in a nutrient solution. But it was tedious to produce, and I'd lost about 2 weeks' worth of work. I thought nothing more of it until the next night when I went to check on my plants before bed. As I turned on the garage light, I noticed something strange in the corner where Mendel sat. A faint blue glow. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I turned off the lights and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. There it was, unmistakable. Mendel was giving off a soft blue luminescence, subtle but definite, emanating primarily from the leaves and stem. "Well, that's unexpected," I whispered, approaching the plant cautiously. The phosphorescent proteins shouldn't have bonded with the plant cells this quickly. I spent the next few hours examining the plant, taking samples, and making notes. The proteins had somehow integrated with the plant cells far more efficiently than any of my controlled experiments had suggested was possible. Mendel was literally glowing, not blindingly bright, but with a gentle, almost ethereal blue light that outlined each leaf and petal. Scientific curiosity took over. I immediately began testing other plants, carefully applying the compound to different species to see if the effect could be replicated. By 3 a.m., I had 5 softly glowing plants in various colors, blue, green, and a soft purple, illuminating my garage laboratory like botanical nightlights. I was so engrossed in my work that I barely noticed my phone buzzing. When I finally checked it, I found an email notification from the HOA, another citation, this time for incomplete garden compliance, with a note that I had failed to adequately space ground cover according to Section 8, 1.7 of landscaping regulations. I looked at my glowing plants, then back at the email. You know what? New plan. The next day, I threw myself into research mode. I pulled up HOA regulations, property law documents, and every scientific paper I could find on bioluminescence in organisms. I barely left my home office except to check on my glowing plants, which were continuing to thrive and even seemed to be growing more vibrant. After 3 days of intensive research, fueled by coffee and scientific indignation, I found what I was looking for. A loophole. The HOA rules were obsessively specific about what could be visible in yards during daylight hours when the Compliance Committee conducted their inspections. There were regulations about plant height, spacing, color, species, and even growth patterns. But nowhere in the 126-page document was there any mention of plants that were only visible at night. I called my department colleague, Dr. Samira Lagari, an expert in plant genetics. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained my accidental discovery and budding plan. "Your homeowners association fined you for unauthorized plants, so now you want to create a garden that only exists at night? Technically, if they can't see it during their inspection hours, does it even exist in their jurisdiction?" I asked. Elliot, I'm pretty sure that's not what the rule was intended to. The best science always happens in the gray areas, Samira. She sighed the sigh of someone who had witnessed my scientific enthusiasm lead to questionable decisions before. This is going to end with you getting evicted, isn't it? Or winning a Nobel Prize. Either way, I need your help understanding how to stabilize and enhance the bioluminescent effect. By the end of the week, I had sketched ambitious plans for a garden that would appear perfectly compliant by day, meeting every ridiculous requirement in Meredith's precious rulebook, but would transform into a bioluminescent wonderland by night. I established clear goals: create a beautiful, harmless bioluminescent garden, stay technically within HOA rules, make a scientific breakthrough in the process. I converted my entire garage into an expanded lab space, ordering specialized equipment and materials. My dining room became a propagation center for new plant varieties. The spare bedroom transformed into a design studio where I mapped out the garden layout, complete with irrigation systems modified to deliver specific nutrients at timed intervals. When I successfully created my first stable glowing plant specimen, a fern that emitted a steady blue light, I named it Marie, after Marie Curie. It seemed fitting to honor the pioneer of radiation research as I embarked on my own illuminating journey. Looking at Marie glowing peacefully on my workbench, I smiled. "Let there be light," I whispered, "and let it drive Meredith Winters absolutely crazy." Creating a bioluminescent garden that could pass for HOA compliant during daylight hours required materials you couldn't just pick up at your local garden center. My shopping expeditions quickly became exercises in creative explanation. "You want how many motion-activated irrigation systems?" asked the confused employee at Garden World, a megastore where I'd previously been a normal, unremarkable customer. 7 zones, all on separate timers, I confirmed. "And I'll need specialized nutrient delivery attachments for each one." "For a residential garden?" He looked at me like I was planning to terraform Mars in my backyard. "It's for precise water conservation," I explained, which wasn't entirely untrue. Different plants have different hydration needs. "Right." He tapped on his tablet. "And you also want the UV filtering garden fabric, all 20 yards of it?" "Correct." "And the light-reflective ground cover?" "Also correct." He looked up from his tablet. "Sir, what exactly are you building?" "A compliant garden with some nighttime features." My bizarre shopping needs eventually led me to Luis Morales, the owner of Innovative Landscapes, who didn't ask questions when I requested specialized installation of complex irrigation systems and soil composition zones. "So these sections need standard soil, but these need the specialized mixture with higher phosphorus content," he clarified, reviewing my detailed garden diagrams. "Yes, and this area needs the soil that can shift pH levels based on moisture content." Instead of looking at me like I was insane, Luis nodded thoughtfully. "I worked on an installation for the botanical gardens last year. They had some specialized requirements too, but nothing quite this specific. When I finally explained what I was actually trying to create, after making him sign a non-disclosure agreement, Luis didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, his eyes lit up. "So you're telling me these plants will actually glow? Like an avatar? And this is to mess with your HOA?" He grinned widely. "I'm in, completely in." Luis proved to be not just a skilled landscaper, but an enthusiastic collaborator. He brought specialized knowledge about irrigation systems I hadn't considered, and practical solutions to problems I'd been overthinking. "If you want the phosphorus-rich mixture to activate at night, you need to consider the soil temperature fluctuations," he explained, modifying my plans. "We should install thermal barriers along these beds." That's brilliant, I admitted. I grew up with a grandmother who believed plants could talk if you listened right, Louise said, carefully measuring out specialized soil. She can't do this, Darius insisted, waving the cease and desist letter. This is a private educational demonstration, not a commercial enterprise. Technically, she can at least try, Jenny said, examining the letter with her law enforcement eye. The HOA regulations do have language about residential usage, but they're stretching the definition of commercial activity well beyond reason. She's trying to shut me down before anyone sees what I've created, I said, pacing around my kitchen. The inspection tomorrow morning is just a tactic to disrupt our preparations. Samira, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. What if we don't wait until tomorrow night? What if we do it tonight instead? We all looked at her. The garden is ready, isn't it? She continued. And you've already sent out invitations. Just send an update. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the demonstration has been moved to tonight. That's actually brilliant, Louise said. Meredith won't expect it. Can we get everything ready in time? I asked, checking my watch. It was already 3 p.m. If we all pitch in, Darius said, already pulling out his phone, we can make it happen. I'll contact the neighbors who were helping with refreshments. I'll handle media contacts, Samira offered. The science reporters will love the breaking news aspect. And I'll make sure we have proper security measures in place, Jenny added. Unofficially, of course. I nodded, a new energy replacing my anxiety. Let's do it. Operation Midnight Bloom is now accelerated to tonight. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Emails and text messages were sent to all invitees announcing the schedule change. Neighbors arrived with food and drinks. University colleagues helped set up demonstration areas explaining the science behind the bioluminescence. By 7 p.m., as the sun began to set, people were already gathering. Local media arrived first. 2 science reporters from regional outlets and a photographer from the university paper. Then came my academic colleagues, many bringing intrigued graduate students. Neighbors began appearing. Some I recognized from our resistance meetings, and others who had simply heard something interesting was happening. To my surprise, several HOA board members arrived as well, though Meredith was noticeably absent. They stood awkwardly to one side, curiosity apparently overcoming their allegiance to regulations. Should we begin the tour? Samira asked, as the crowd grew to about 50 people milling around my front yard, which still appeared to be a perfectly ordinary, if meticulously maintained, garden. I checked my watch. Let's wait another 15 minutes for full darkness. I want the full effect for the first reveal. Just as I finished speaking, a black SUV screeched to a halt across the street. Meredith emerged, clutching her HOA binder, with 2 other board members following behind her. Her face, when she saw the gathering crowd, was a study in outraged disbelief. "Dr. Clark," she shouted, marching across the street. "What is the meaning of this? You received explicit instructions to cancel this unauthorized event." I stepped forward to meet her, maintaining a calm, professional demeanor despite my racing heart. "Good evening, Miss Winters. This is a private educational demonstration for my colleagues from the university. I believe my property deed allows for private gatherings." "This is clearly a public event," she snapped, gesturing to the growing crowd. "And it constitutes a violation of at least 3 separate HOA regulations." Before I could respond, the automatic timer on my irrigation system activated with a soft hum. Right on schedule, the specialized nutrient solution began flowing through the underground delivery system. Perfect timing. "I'm happy to discuss any concerns you have about HOA regulations," I said smoothly. "But first, I'd like to unveil a project that I think demonstrates how science can enhance our community environment." Turning to address the crowd, I raised my voice slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this demonstration of bioluminescent botanical technology. What you're about to see is the result of months of research into sustainable natural lighting using modified plant biology. I glanced at my watch. In approximately 3 minutes, as the specialized compounds are absorbed through the root systems, you'll witness something remarkable. I ask that you remain on the pathways to protect the specimens. Meredith pushed forward. This is a complete violation of Sections 7, 8, and possibly 12, she declared, flipping frantically through her binder. Unauthorized landscaping, excessive lighting, improper... Her voice trailed off as the first faint glow appeared along the garden path. A murmur rippled through the crowd as blue luminescence began outlining the stepping stones. Then, like a wave of gentle light, the transformation swept through the garden. Plants that had appeared ordinary moments before began to emit their soft glow. Ferns unfurling glowing green fronds, flowers opening to reveal luminescent centers, shrubs seeming to light up from within with a network of glowing veins. The crowd gasped collectively. Camera flashes popped as people tried to capture the magical transformation. Even Meredith stood frozen, her binder forgotten at her side, as the ordinary suburban garden became an otherworldly landscape of living light. The technology you're seeing, I explained to the captivated audience, utilizes naturally occurring bioluminescent proteins modified to function within plant cells. It creates sustainable light without electricity, heat, or harmful emissions. As I led the first group along the glowing blue pathway, I pointed out different specimens and explained their modifications. The science reporters scribbled notes frantically, occasionally stopping to record video of particularly spectacular plants. Meredith had recovered enough to follow along, still clutching her binder, but seemingly unable to find a relevant violation to cite in the face of the breathtaking display surrounding her. The other HOA board members had abandoned any pretense of disapproval and were openly admiring the garden. When the initial tour concluded, I returned to the front yard to find an even larger crowd had gathered. News had spread quickly, and people from around the neighborhood and beyond were arriving to see the phenomenon. Meredith finally found her voice again, cornering me as I was explaining the nutritional delivery system to a group of fascinated botany students. "This is completely unacceptable," she hissed, though with less conviction than earlier. "Your approved landscaping plan had no mention of whatever this is." "Actually," I said, pulling a folder from the information table, "if you'll review my official submissions, you'll note that all daytime visible plants strictly conform to HOA regulations. Section 7 specifically regulates plants visible during daylight hours." I handed her several photographs showing the garden in daylight, with measurement grids proving compliance. As you can see, during regular inspection hours, everything is in perfect compliance. But the lights are not artificial lighting fixtures, I completed for her. They're biological components of the plants themselves, making them exempt from Section 12's limitations on landscape lighting. I distributed similar handouts to the crowd, complete with references to specific HOA regulations and explanations of how the garden technically complied with each one. The university dean, who had arrived during the commotion, approached us. "Dr. Clark, this is remarkable work. The potential applications for sustainable lighting alone are worth exploring through an expanded research program." A local reporter pushed forward with a recording device. "Dr. Clark, can you comment on the environmental benefits of this technology? Could this reduce energy consumption on a larger scale?" As I began explaining the potential applications, Meredith made one final attempt to regain control. "The light itself is a violation of our light pollution ordinance," she declared. Section 15.2 clearly states, "Yen." Actually, Jenny interrupted, stepping forward. As the neighborhood compliance officer, I can confirm these light levels are well within municipal guidelines for residential areas. They're less intense than standard landscape lighting and produce no upward light scatter. Meredith looked from Jenny to me to the glowing garden, her expression cycling through frustration, disbelief, and, just maybe, a reluctant hint of wonder. "Well," she finally said, straightening her jacket, "the HOA board will need to review this situation in detail." But her usual conviction was noticeably diminished as she wandered back into the garden, pausing to examine a particularly beautiful cluster of glowing ferns. By midnight, when the event finally wound down, it was clear something extraordinary had happened, not just scientifically, but socially. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years without speaking were chatting excitedly. University colleagues were discussing research possibilities with local business owners. Even a few HOA board members were quietly asking me about the possibility of adding small, bioluminescent sections to their own gardens. As the last guests departed, Luis helped me turn off the specialized irrigation system. "So," he said with a grin, "was it worth all the trouble?" I looked out over my gently glowing garden and nodded. "Absolutely, though I have a feeling this is just the beginning of the trouble." I had no idea how right I was. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone repeatedly buzzing with notifications. Bleary-eyed, I scrolled through dozens of missed calls, text messages, and emails, all responding to what had apparently become an overnight sensation. The local news feature on my garden had been picked up by national outlets. #GlowingGarden was trending on social media platforms. 3 scientific journals had emailed requesting papers on the technology. And most surprisingly, a representative from the mayor's office wanted to discuss potential civic applications of botanical illumination technology. When I opened my front door to retrieve the newspaper, I found a line of cars slowly driving past my house. People pointed and took photos, even though the garden looked entirely ordinary in daylight. Darius jogged across the street, coffee in hand. "Congratulations, you're famous! Or at least your plants are." "This is not what I expected," I admitted, accepting the offered coffee. "Property values just went up 15% overnight," he said with a grin. "Even Meredith can't argue with that." The media explosion continued throughout the week. Local television stations ran special segments. National science publications requested interviews. Environmental groups issued statements praising the sustainable lighting concept. My university phone line became so overwhelmed with calls that the department assigned a student assistant just to screen them. The sudden attention created unexpected problems. Traffic in our normally quiet suburb increased dramatically as people drove through hoping to glimpse the garden after dark. Peaceful Pines. Security found themselves dealing with amateur botanists trying to collect samples from my yard. The HOA emergency meeting, hastily convened 3 days after my demonstration, was attended by more homeowners than any meeting in neighborhood history. I arrived to find the community center packed with residents, media representatives, and even some local politicians. Meredith called the meeting to order with a gavel bang that sounded distinctly more aggressive than usual. "As you all know," she began, "we have a situation regarding unauthorized botanical modifications at 42 Pinecrest Lane." A resident near the back called out, "You mean the amazing glowing garden that's put our neighborhood on the map?" Scattered applause followed this comment, and Meredith's mouth tightened into a thin line. "The board recognizes that there is interest in Dr. Clark's experiment. However, we must consider the implications for our community standards." What followed was the most contentious HOA meeting in Peaceful Pines history. Residents who had never spoken at meetings before stood up to voice their opinions. I think it's incredible what Dr. Clark has created. My grandchildren drove 2 hours just to see the garden. I've lived here 8 years, and this is the first time I've actually wanted to talk to my neighbors. But there were also concerns. The traffic is becoming a nuisance. What about long-term effects on property values? Is this technology even safe? I addressed the safety question directly, distributing a preliminary report on the biological mechanisms involved and explaining how the plants produced light without heat or radiation. The meeting concluded with a decision that surprised everyone, including me. The HOA would form an exploratory committee to consider revisions to the landscaping guidelines that would create a special category for innovative botanical installations, subject to review and approval. Even more surprisingly, Meredith approached me after the meeting. "Dr. Clark," she said stiffly, "while I maintain that your methods were unorthodox, I cannot deny that your creation has generated positive attention for our community." Coming from Meredith, this was practically a declaration of undying admiration. While the neighborhood adjusted to its newfound fame, the scientific impact of my work was spreading through academic circles. The university recognized the breakthrough with special funding for expanded research. Several companies specializing in sustainable technology reached out about potential commercial applications. My department colleague Samira was instrumental in helping document and publish our findings. As we worked late one evening in my lab, she shook her head in amazement. "You realize you just revolutionized 2 fields while trying to annoy your HOA, right?" she said, reviewing our data on light production efficiency. "This could transform how we think about urban lighting." The practical applications seemed endless. Parks with self-illuminating pathways, emergency lighting that required no electricity, decorative landscaping that doubled as functional illumination. Each new possibility generated more interest from businesses, environmental groups, and government agencies. My research team expanded to include graduate students and collaborators from other universities. We established testing sites to evaluate different species and applications, with my front yard serving as the original demonstration model. As scientific attention grew, a subtle shift occurred in Peaceful Pines. Other residents began requesting variances for their own innovative landscaping. Initially, these were modest: a small section of glowing plants along a walkway or luminescent flowers around a mailbox, but each successful application emboldened others. The HOA board found itself forced to hold twice-monthly meetings to address the flood of variance requests. The community divided between traditional members who valued the original aesthetic uniformity and the growing faction of botanical innovators who saw my garden as the start of a neighborhood renaissance. Meredith faced unexpected challenges to her leadership as residents questioned rules that many had previously accepted without thought. At a particularly heated meeting, someone proposed a complete overhaul of the landscaping regulations. To everyone's surprise, Darius nominated me for the Landscape Committee. Who better to rewrite the rules than the guy who found all the loopholes? I tried to decline, but the idea gained immediate support. Somehow I found myself reluctantly involved in HOA politics, the very system I'd been trying to circumvent. An unlikely alliance formed with some board members who recognized the potential benefits of controlled innovation. After weeks of negotiations, community surveys, and property value analyses, the HOA voted to create a designated innovation zone, where experimental landscaping would be permitted within certain parameters. As my professional and community standing evolved, I noticed personal changes as well. I had moved to Peaceful Pines as a recently divorced man seeking solitude to focus on my research. Instead, I found myself at the center of a vibrant community network. New friendships formed with neighbors who had previously been strangers. Darius and his family became regular visitors to my home. Jenny and I developed a relationship that moved gradually from professional respect to personal connection, bonding over shared interests in science and sustainability. 6 months after the initial revelation, my garden had evolved into a community gathering spot. I hosted educational tours for local schools, teaching children about bioluminescence and plant biology using the living laboratory in my front yard. The HOA had adopted new, more flexible regulations that balanced neighborhood aesthetics with room for innovation. Even Meredith had reluctantly embraced the change, now proudly describing Peaceful Pines to visitors as America's most innovative planned community. Several neighbors had adopted their own, less dramatic bioluminescent elements in their landscaping. Our street became known locally as Glow Row, and property values had indeed increased substantially. Real estate listings in the neighborhood now highlighted proximity to the world-famous bioluminescent botanical installation. What had begun as a petty response to an HOA fine had transformed into something that benefited the entire community, professionally, financially, and socially. Sometimes the best discoveries really do come from unexpected places, even homeowner association disputes. 1 year after the garden's dramatic unveiling, Peaceful Pines organized a community celebration of what had come to be known as the Luminescent Garden. The event, ironically, was chaired by Meredith herself, who had gradually transitioned from opponent to reluctant supporter, and finally to enthusiastic advocate once she realized the positive attention it brought to her beloved community. A small stage had been set up in the community park, and I found myself invited to give the keynote address. Looking out at the gathered crowd, neighbors, colleagues, media representatives, and visitors, I felt a moment of surreal disconnection. How had my small act of scientific rebellion led to all this? "A year ago," I began, "I was standing in my front yard staring at a citation for unauthorized plants and wondering how I'd ended up in a community where the color of one's mulch was regulated by committee." This drew knowing laughter from the residents. What began as an admittedly petty response to that fine has grown into something none of us could have anticipated. The bioluminescent technology pioneered in my front garden is now being implemented in public spaces across 3 states. The university has established a research center dedicated to botanical illumination. And most importantly, our community has discovered that innovation and standardization can coexist. Sometimes a little light is all you need to see new possibilities. After my speech, Meredith approached the microphone. We had developed a grudging respect over the months of committee work, though I wouldn't go so far as to call it friendship. "I would like to acknowledge," she said with characteristic precision, "that while Dr. Clark's methods were unorthodox and his compliance with HOA regulations was creative at best." More laughter from the audience. "His innovations have benefited our community in unexpected ways." She turned to face me directly. "I still maintain you violated the spirit of our regulations." "And I maintain that innovation happens at boundaries," I replied. A slight smile crossed her face. "Perhaps our boundaries needed some illumination." Coming from Meredith, this was practically stand-up comedy. The crowd applauded appreciatively. The year had brought changes none of us could have predicted. The town had become something of a tourist destination, with visitors coming specifically to see the bioluminescent landscaping. Local businesses had embraced the theme, selling everything from glow garden t-shirts to plant-themed souvenirs. Other HOAs had sent representatives to learn about our new regulatory approach, which balanced community standards with room for innovation. Environmental impact studies showed the technology had potential to significantly reduce electricity usage for decorative and safety lighting. I found myself struggling to balance research, teaching, and newfound public interest in my work. The garden itself had evolved with new varieties and features as our research progressed. Each improvement brought new visitors and new questions about potential applications. Luis had leveraged his expertise in the installation process to start a specialized landscaping business called Glow and Grow, which now had contracts throughout the region for both residential and commercial properties. Jenny had made a career change from law enforcement to environmental science enforcement, helping develop guidelines for the safe implementation of bioluminescent technology in public spaces. Perhaps the most surprising development came 6 months after the celebration, when Meredith requested a private meeting with me. I arrived at the community center expecting another debate about compliance details for a new variance request. Instead, I found her surrounded by architectural drawings and municipal planning documents. "Dr. Clark," she began formally, "the council has approved a proposal to create a central community park using your technology. We would like to request your assistance as a consultant on the project." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You're asking me, the HOA's public enemy #1, to design your showcase project?" "I'm asking the world's leading expert in bioluminescent landscaping to help our community become a model for sustainable development," she corrected, her tone softening slightly. The old regulations served their purpose for their time, but communities must evolve to remain viable. We spent the next hour discussing possibilities. Despite our history, or perhaps because of it, we found productive common ground. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined a collaborative approach that would include both my scientific expertise and her impressive organizational skills. On a warm evening the following summer, I sat in my expanded garden, now a sophisticated blend of science and art. Darius and other neighbors had gathered for one of our regular glow nights, informal gatherings where we enjoyed the peaceful ambience of the luminescent plants while sharing ideas and conversation. Jenny sat beside me, discussing plans for implementing similar technology in the city's Riverside Park. Our relationship had grown gradually over shared projects and common interests, developing into something neither of us had expected when she first arrived to investigate reports of suspicious activities in my garage. As I looked around at this impromptu community that had formed around a garden created out of spite, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. I had moved to peaceful Pines, seeking isolation after my divorce, planning to focus solely on my research. Instead, I found connection through the very act of rebellion against community restrictions. A visiting botanical researcher from another university approached, notepad in hand. "I've been studying your integration techniques all evening," she said. "The way you've balanced the daytime aesthetic with the nighttime transformation is remarkable. What inspired you to create something so revolutionary?" I exchanged a glance with Jenny, who barely suppressed a smile. "Would you believe a $350 fine for unauthorized plants?" I replied. The researcher laughed. "You're joking. I've learned that the best discoveries happen when you're just stubborn enough to ask, 'What if?'" I gestured to the glowing landscape around us. "And sometimes, the answer changes everything." Later that night, after the gathering had dispersed, I added a small brass plaque near the garden entrance. It read simply, "From petty rebellion grows innovation, and also very cool glowing plants." As I stood back to admire both the plaque and the gently pulsing botanical wonderland beyond, I reflected on how a single HOA fine had led to scientific breakthrough, community transformation, and personal growth. Sometimes the path to discovery is straight and logical, and sometimes it winds through suburban landscaping disputes, HOA regulation loopholes, and the stubborn determination to grow unauthorized plants. In science, we're taught that negative results are still results. What appears to be a failure often contains the seeds of unexpected discovery. My luminescent garden stood as living proof that the same principle applies to neighborhood conflicts. What had begun as a petty act of rebellion had illuminated possibilities none of us could have imagined, a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight darkness is with light, literally. Do you love what you're doing here? Giving them a voice through light. As we worked together, Luis introduced me to his cousin who worked for the city's water department and could help us navigate permits for the specialized irrigation system without raising too many questions. We had our first close call with Meredith about 2 weeks into the installation. Luis and his crew were unloading some specialized lighting equipment when her black SUV pulled up across the street. With the reflexes of someone who'd dealt with nosy neighbors before, Luis threw a tarp over the equipment just as Meredith approached, her HOA binder clutched against her chest like a shield. "Dr. Clark," she said, her eyes scanning every inch of my yard for violations. "I see you're making some changes to your irrigation." "Just trying to be water efficient," I replied with a forced smile. "Conservation is important." "Indeed, though I notice you're installing quite an elaborate system for such basic plantings." "Better to be thorough," I said vaguely. She made a show of consulting her binder. "I trust you filed the proper exterior modification forms. Section 14.2 requires approval for any irrigation systems visible above ground." Luis stepped forward smoothly. "Actually, ma'am, when we're finished, nothing will be visible. It's all subsurface drip irrigation, very efficient and completely hidden." Meredith's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "I'm pleased to see you're installing proper irrigation, Dr. Clark. Perhaps you're learning our standards after all." "Just trying to be a good neighbor, Miss Winters," I replied with a smile that made my face hurt. As she walked away, Luis muttered, "Does she seriously have that entire binder memorized?" "I think she sleeps with it under her pillow," I whispered back. While the exterior work progressed, I continued my research in the garage laboratory. Each night brought new breakthroughs as I refined the bioluminescent compounds and tested them on different plant varieties. I discovered that certain species accepted the modifications more readily than others. Ferns became spectacular with their intricate fronds outlined in green light. Succulents developed an almost jewel-like glow from within. Flowering plants could be coaxed into having luminescent blooms in blues, greens, and soft purples. My garage became a magical space where science and beauty merged. I often found myself talking to the plants as I worked, a habit from my childhood that had become more pronounced since my divorce. "Edison, your light expression is magnificent," I told a particularly bright specimen. "Newton, you're still struggling with the chromatic proteins, aren't you? We'll figure it out." One night, after a particularly long session of genetic modifications, I fell asleep at my workbench. When I woke, disoriented in the middle of the night, I found myself surrounded by dozens of gently glowing plants. The blue, green, and purple light bathed the garage in an otherworldly glow, creating patterns on the walls and ceiling like an underwater cave. It was at that moment I realized I'd created something truly extraordinary, not just a scientific achievement, but something of genuine beauty. This wasn't just about getting back at the HOA anymore. It was about creating wonder. Of course, the path to wonder wasn't without obstacles. A batch of plants developed unstable light patterns, flickering randomly instead of producing steady illumination. Another experiment resulted in a minor explosion when a chemical mixture intended to enhance luminosity turned out to be more reactive than anticipated. The explosion, though small, was loud enough to concern a neighbor who called the police about strange lights and noises coming from my garage at 11 p.m. Officer Jenny Rodriguez arrived at my door, looking tired and skeptical. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the weary expression of someone who'd rather be dealing with actual crimes. "Sir, we received a complaint about unusual activity," she said, her flashlight beam sweeping past me toward the interior of the house. "Mind if I come in?" "Actually, officer, the activity was in my garage," I admitted. "I'm a botanist with the university, and I was conducting some research that got a bit enthusiastic." Her eyebrow raised. "Enthusiastic research at 11 p.m. in a residential neighborhood?" "It's perfectly safe," I assured her. "Just a small chemical reaction that was louder than expected." She didn't look convinced. "I'll need to see this garage laboratory, sir." I hesitated, then nodded. "This way, but it might seem a little unusual." When I opened the garage door, Officer Rodriguez's professional demeanor cracked for a moment. Her eyes widened at the sight of my glowing garden, the plants casting their multicolored light throughout the space. "What in the world?" she whispered. "Bioluminescent plants," I explained, switching to my professor voice. "I've been researching the integration of marine bioluminescent proteins into botanical specimens to create sustainable natural lighting." She approached one of the ferns cautiously. "They're beautiful. And this is legal?" "Completely. It's just botanical research using proteins that naturally occur in jellyfish and certain deep-sea organisms." She circled the room slowly, studying the different plants. When she reached my workbench, she noticed the framed photo of my university ID and research credentials. "Dr. Clark," she read, "you're actually serious about this being research." "I am, though I'll admit it also has to do with a disagreement with my HOA about acceptable landscaping." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Let me guess. Peaceful Pines? Meredith Winters? You know her?" "We get calls about HOA disputes at least twice a week from your neighborhood." Officer Rodriguez shook her head. "Usually it's noise complaints or unauthorized lawn ornaments. Never seen anyone respond with glowing plants before." She spent the next 20 minutes asking surprisingly insightful questions about the science behind the plants. As she was preparing to leave, she paused. "My daughter's science fair is coming up. She would lose her mind over this." "I'd be happy to help with a project," I offered. "Something age-appropriate, of course. I might take you up on that." She handed me her card. "And Dr. Clark? Maybe try to keep the explosions to a minimum. I won't file a report this time, but your neighbors might not be so understanding next time." As she left, I faced a new challenge: how to keep the plants appearing normal during the day. The bioluminescence was only visible in darkness, but some of the modified plants had subtle differences in daylight, unusual colors or patterns that might trigger Meredith's botanical spidey sense. The breakthrough came when I developed plants with special foliage that literally changed configuration from day to night. Using plant species with natural nyctinastic movements, the closing of leaves at night, like how some flowers close their petals. I enhanced these properties so the glowing portions would be hidden during the day. As the exterior and interior work proceeded, Luis introduced me to other homeowners who had clashed with the HOA. They began offering help and resources, forming a sort of underground resistance network. I met Richard, an electrician who helped design specialized lighting that looked like ordinary landscape illumination, but actually enhanced the bioluminescence at night. Helen, a retired engineer, created automated systems that would subtly shift certain plants after dark to reveal their glowing parts. We began holding comical secret meetings in my basement, where neighbors would arrive with covered dishes as if attending a normal dinner party, then spend the evening discussing soil pH modulators and light-reactive irrigation systems. "This isn't just about plants anymore," Darius declared at one of these gatherings. "This is about standing up to botanical tyranny." As he raised his glass in a mock toast, I looked around at these people who had become unexpected allies in my scientifically elaborate revenge plot. A community was forming, Ironically, exactly what the HOA claimed to promote, but had failed to create with all their rigid rules. After 2 months of work, the day of the first full test arrived. On the surface, my front yard looked like the model of HOA compliance. I had meticulously followed every ridiculous regulation. Perfectly aligned rows of approved plants, spaced exactly 36 inches apart. 3 authorized shades of green foliage. Regulation pine bark mulch, spread to a uniform depth of 2 inches. Symmetrical placement of approved flowering species. Meredith had actually nodded approvingly during her last casual walk past my house. If she had any suspicions about the unusual amount of work being done, the end result seemed to have temporarily satisfied her. What wasn't visible during the day was the specialized irrigation system that delivered specific nutrients at timed intervals. Soil composition zones containing different mineral concentrations. UV-filtered fabric layers strategically placed beneath certain plants. Thermal modulators that would activate chemical processes after dark. Nanoscale light reflectors mixed into the mulch. As sunset approached, Luis, Darius, and a few trusted neighbors gathered in my backyard for the grand unveiling. I had set up a small refreshment table, and there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. "So it all activates automatically?" Darius asked, checking his watch as the sun began to set. "Most of it," I explained. "The irrigation system will deliver the final catalyst solution when the light sensors detect sunset. Then it takes about 15 minutes for the full effect to develop." "And Meredith has no idea?" Helen grinned mischievously. "Not unless she's installed surveillance cameras," I replied. Which, honestly, wouldn't surprise me. As dusk deepened, we watched expectantly. At first, the changes were subtle. A faint blue glow appearing along the garden pathways, a gentle pulsing from certain shrubs. But as full darkness fell, the transformation became truly magical. The ordinary garden had become an ethereal landscape. Blue glowing pathways wound between clusters of plants with softly illuminated leaves. Flowers that had been ordinary white blooms during the day now pulsed with gentle purple light. The previously conventional shrubs now appeared to have luminescent veins running through their leaves, creating patterns like glowing lace. Most spectacular were the modified ferns, which emanated an intense green glow that highlighted their intricate structures, making them look like neon sculptures. The entire front yard had become a luminescent wonderland, casting enough light to illuminate the walkway without any artificial lighting. "My God," whispered Darius, his face bathed in the blue glow. "It's like walking through a dream." Luis walked slowly along the pathway, shaking his head in amazement. "I helped install this, and I still can't believe what I'm seeing. Meredith is going to have an aneurysm." "That's not the goal," I said, though I couldn't suppress a smile at the thought. "The goal is compliance with the letter of the law, just not its spirit. Scientifically enhanced malicious compliance." We spent hours in the garden that night, identifying adjustments needed and celebrating what had worked. The irrigation system needed fine-tuning in the northwest corner, and a few plants showed weaker luminescence than others. But overall, the effect exceeded even my expectations. As word spread among my allies, we established a careful schedule of small group viewings to avoid attracting too much attention. But maintaining secrecy in a neighborhood as vigilant as peaceful pines proved challenging. The first close call came when Meredith made a surprise daytime inspection the following week. I was adjusting one of the hidden nutrient dispensers when her voice cut through the morning air. "Dr. Clark, I see you've finally embraced our landscaping standards." I quickly closed the access panel and stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "Just doing my part for neighborhood beautification." She circled my front yard with the focused intensity of a building inspector at a suspected code violation. Your transformation is surprisingly thorough. I don't see a single non-conforming specimen. I took your guidance to heart, I lied smoothly. Indeed. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed Luis's truck parked down the street. I can't help noticing an unusual number of delivery trucks visiting your property lately. Just some equipment for my university research, I explained. All being stored in the garage, completely in compliance with Section 12.4 of the storage bylaws. I'd quoted her Bible back to her, and a flicker of what might have been respect crossed her face before she resumed her suspicious scrutiny. Our second near discovery occurred when a neighbor's child accidentally activated a section of the garden during daylight hours by spilling a drink near a sensor. I quickly created a cover story about testing solar-powered garden lights. They charge during the day and glow at night, I explained to the curious parent. Very energy efficient. These close calls increased my paranoia about being discovered before I was ready, but they also provided valuable lessons in how to better conceal the system's components. Despite our efforts at discretion, word began to spread. My university students, some of whom lived in nearby apartments, started noticing the nighttime glow. Social media posts appeared showing mysterious lights in our neighborhood, though thankfully without identifying the exact location. Small groups of cars began driving slowly past my house after dark, hoping to glimpse the phenomenon. Local photographers set up across the street with long exposure cameras. The situation escalated when a local news reporter left a message on my office phone about unusual lights reported in my neighborhood. We're doing a feature on unique home landscaping, her voicemail explained. Several sources mentioned something special at your address. I didn't return the call, instead telling curious inquirers it was just an experiment in energy-efficient landscape lighting. But I realized I couldn't keep this secret much longer, especially as the scientific implications of my work began to dawn on me. You know you've created something revolutionary here, right? Luis pointed out one evening, as we adjusted the irrigation system. This isn't just about getting back at the HOA anymore. I looked at my glowing creation and nodded slowly. I know. I'm already documenting everything for potential publication. This could transform how we think about sustainable lighting. As I debated how to handle the growing attention, Officer Rodriguez made a return visit, this time in plain clothes and with a young girl who looked about 12. "Hope you don't mind," she said when I answered the door. "This is my daughter, Zoe. She's working on her science project about bioluminescence. And, well, I thought maybe you could give her some inspiration." The official visit had become an unofficial educational tour. As I showed them around the nighttime garden, Zoe's face lit up with wonder that matched the plants surrounding us. "You made these yourself?" she asked, examining a glowing fern with careful fingers. "I modified them," I explained. "The ability to produce light already exists in nature. Jellyfish, fireflies, certain fungi. I just found a way to transfer that ability to plants." Officer Rodriguez, who asked me to call her Jenny when off duty, revealed she was taking night classes in environmental science at the community college. "This could have amazing applications," she noted as we walked the luminescent paths. "Parks could light themselves. Roadways could have illuminated margins without electricity." Our conversation shifted from the garden to broader implications, creating an unexpected connection. When Zoe wandered ahead to examine a particularly bright cluster of flowers, Jenny lowered her voice. "You should know the HOA has been making inquiries at the station about unusual nighttime activity at your address." "Are they filing complaints?" "Not yet. But they're fishing for violations. Noise ordinances, light pollution, improper home business, anything they can use." She gave me a significant look. "If I were you, I'd make sure all my permits are in order. and I might consider going public on my own terms before someone else controls the narrative. Her warning confirmed what I'd already been considering. It was time to reveal the garden officially, on my terms, before Meredith found a way to shut me down. I decided to orchestrate the garden's official unveiling as a scientific open house. I sent formal invitations to my university colleagues, framing it as a research presentation on sustainable bioluminescent landscaping applications. I even sent a courtesy invitation to the HOA board, with a note explaining the academic nature of the event. Luis and my neighborhood allies helped prepare for the event, setting up a small refreshment area in my backyard and creating informational placards explaining the science behind different sections of the garden. "So you're basically planning a scientific garden party to show up the HOA?" Luis asked as we hung string lights, conventional ones, in the backyard. "This is the nerdiest revenge plot I've ever been part of." "It's not revenge, it's education," I insisted, though we both knew better. I also invited local media outlets, carefully framing it as a scientific breakthrough in sustainable lighting rather than a neighborhood dispute. Jenny agreed to attend in an unofficial capacity to maintain order if needed. As the day approached, my anxiety increased. The garden was functioning perfectly, the science was solid, and I had all the proper permits for what was essentially an academic demonstration on private property. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Meredith would find some way to interfere. My instinct proved correct. The day before the planned reveal, a courier delivered an emergency HOA violation notice. Cease and desist. Unauthorized commercial activity, violation section 4. 1.9 prohibits using residential property for commercial or educational enterprises without proper zoning variances. Your planned open house constitutes a violation of residential property usage regulations. Required action: cancel all planned events or face immediate fines of $500 per day plus potential legal action. The notice also informed me that Meredith had scheduled an emergency compliance inspection for 9 a.m. the following morning, conveniently timed to disrupt my evening event preparations. I immediately called an emergency meeting with my core allies: Luis, Darius, Jenny, and Samira from the university, who had become increasingly involved in the research aspects of the project. I still find it strange to see my name on the building. The Clark Center for Sustainable Bioluminescent Technologies reads the elegant sign at the entrance to the gleaming research facility that now stands where an abandoned strip mall once sat at the edge of our town. Inside, 47 researchers and a rotating cast of graduate students work on expanding what began in my garage 5 years ago. Today is the center's 2nd anniversary, and I'm giving yet another tour to potential investors. I've become surprisingly comfortable with this role. A significant change for someone who once preferred plants to people. "As you can see," I tell the group of suited executives following me through the main laboratory, "we've expanded well beyond ornamental applications. Dr. Lagari's team is now focused on agricultural implementations." Samira waves from her workstation, where several ordinary-looking tomato plants sit under specialized lighting. Only they're not ordinary at all. These plants have been modified to glow specifically when they need water or nutrients, a visual indicator that eliminates guesswork in resource management. Imagine farms that tell you exactly what they need and when, I explain to the fascinated investors. We're reducing water usage by up to 40% in early field trials. "And the energy applications?" asks a woman from a major utility company. I lead them to another section where Luis, now our Director of Environmental Integration, demonstrates street lighting powered entirely by bioluminescent trees. "We've achieved illumination equal to standard streetlights with 0 electrical consumption," Luis explains proudly. "The prototypes have been operating in the downtown district for 18 months without interruption." What began as my revenge against Meredith Winters has evolved into something that even my most optimistic projections couldn't have predicted. The technology has expanded into applications I never imagined. Emergency lighting systems for hospitals, self-illuminating highway markers, agricultural monitoring tools, and architectural features that blend beauty with functionality. After the tour concludes and the investors depart, suitably impressed and reaching for their checkbooks, I drive back to Peaceful Pines, which has itself undergone a transformation. The once rigidly uniform neighborhood has become a showcase for biological innovation. Each street has its own character after dark, some with subtle, elegant illumination, and others with more dramatic displays. My original garden has been maintained but expanded, now serving as both my personal retreat and an unofficial laboratory where I test new ideas before bringing them to the research center. The HOA still exists, but the regulations have evolved to encourage controlled creativity within community guidelines. As I pull into my driveway, I spot a familiar figure inspecting one of the newest additions to my front yard, a maple tree whose leaves glow with a soft amber light in the early evening. "Still coming up with ways to break the rules, Dr. Clark?" Meredith asks, though the question lacks its old antagonism. "Still finding ways to improve them, Miss Winters," I reply with a smile. Meredith retired from the HOA presidency 3 years ago, but remains involved as a community standards consultant. Our relationship has evolved into one of mutual respect, though we still debate frequently about the balance between innovation and order. "The revised guidelines for seasonal displays need your input," she says, handing me a tablet. "The committee is concerned about excessive light intensity during holiday periods." "I'll review it tonight," I promise, taking the tablet. "Are you coming to the anniversary reception?" "Wouldn't miss it. Someone has to make sure you scientists don't get carried away celebrating." She departs with a wave, passing Jenny, who is arriving with her daughter Zoe, now 17, and conducting her own experiments with bioluminescent plants in our shared home laboratory. Jenny and I married 2 years ago, combining her practical environmental enforcement expertise with my theoretical research in ways that have strengthened both. "How were the investors?" Jenny asks, greeting me with a kiss. "Impressed, especially with the emergency response applications." As a former police officer, Jenny had been the one to recognize how bioluminescent markers could aid first responders during power outages or natural disasters. Her insight led to one of our most important patents and saved countless lives during last year's hurricane season in Florida. That evening, as neighbors and colleagues gather in our backyard, now a sophisticated blend of traditional and bioluminescent landscaping, I find myself reflecting on the journey. Darius joins me, bringing glasses of champagne. "Remember when all this started with you getting fined for unauthorized plants?" He laughs, handing me a glass. "I'm still not sure if you're a mad genius or just incredibly stubborn." "Both," Jenny answers for me as she joins our conversation. "Definitely both." Across the yard, Meredith is engaged in animated conversation with the mayor about the citywide implementation of glowing path markers in public parks. Luis is showing off blueprints for the new botanical garden installation to a group of international visitors. Samira is explaining her latest research to fascinated graduate students. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" Darius asks, gesturing to the gathering. I look around at the community that formed from my small act of rebellion, the friends, the innovations, the positive changes spreading far beyond our neighborhood. My glowing garden had been intended as sophisticated revenge against bureaucratic pettiness, but it had become something much more meaningful. "Not in my wildest dreams," I admit. "But that's the thing about planting seeds. You never know exactly what will grow." After the guests depart, Jenny and I walk through the garden that started everything. The newest generation of plants is more sophisticated, more efficient, brighter when needed, with improved color range and duration. But I still keep a section of the original specimens, including Marie, that first fern that glowed blue under the influence of my spilled compound. "You know what still amazes me?" Jenny says, as we pause by a cluster of luminescent flowers that pulse gently with our approach. How something so beautiful came from such a petty beginning. I prefer to think of it as creatively redirected frustration, I correct her with a smile. "Call it what you want," she laughs. "But your $350 fine might be the best return on investment in scientific history." She's right, of course. My battle with the HOA had launched a technology now valued in the billions, created hundreds of jobs, formed a vibrant community, and even, though I still find this part hard to believe, made Meredith Winters admit that sometimes breaking the rules is necessary for progress. I reach down and touch one of the original plants, which responds by brightening slightly, a feature we discovered by accident and later refined. A perfect metaphor for how a little resistance can sometimes make things shine more brightly. "Let's go in," Jenny says, taking my hand. "You have HOA guidelines to review." The glamorous life of a revolutionary botanist. I sigh dramatically, but follow her inside. On my desk sits a framed copy of that original HOA violation notice, $350 for unauthorized plants, next to my certificates for patents, scientific awards, and the key to the city. I keep it there as a reminder that sometimes the best things grow from the most unlikely beginnings. And also because it's funny as hell.